There are several among us that like to read a lot. And, I can name them out, but I don't want to embarrass them. But one of the things I enjoy about reading is a little bit of the backstory of the author, maybe why they wrote the particular book. And I find anymore, since I read, I don't know, several books a week, and I look at the backstory, I'm finding I'm doing more backstory reading almost than I am reading the book itself. But I kind of like that too, because you learn. Next week, Lord willing, we're going to talk about life. And we're going to talk about it from the perspective of the book of Ecclesiastes. A few weeks ago, somebody asked me, when can we go back and study Ecclesiastes again? I thought, boy, it just seems to me like we did it not too many years ago. So I went back in my notes and files and saw that we had indeed studied Ecclesiastes about 5 years ago. So I thought maybe later on this year, we'll see what happens. But I thought we could do a little bit of an overview. But in order to really appreciate the book of Ecclesiastes, I think it's kind of important that we know about its author, know a little bit more about him, and all the things relative to him and about him. I mean, we're familiar so much with his writings, whether it be in Proverbs or Ecclesiastes, probably not so much the Song of Solomon, but we do know a lot about him. In the book of Ecclesiastes, the 12th chapter and verse 1, remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days comes and the year draw near, when you will say, I have no delight in them. Before the sun, the light, the moon, and the stars darkened, clouds return after the rain. In the day that the watchmen of the house tremble, mighty men stoop, the grinding ones stand idle because they are few, and those who look through windows grow dim. The doors on the street are shut, as the sound of the grinding mill is low, and the one will arise at the sound of the bird, and all the daughters of song will sing softly. Well, as this 12th chapter of Ecclesiastes unfolds, it is apparent that the individual is aware of the brevity of life. Now, I particularly think that Solomon writes the book of Ecclesiastes sometime in his middle age, long before the ravages of old age begin to creep up on him. Because as we're going to see, Solomon had a varied life. And kind of an interesting life when you really stop and think about it. Because Solomon is indeed a man who had success. Success beyond our wildest dreams. I mean, face it, you sit back in the quietness of your day and you go, oh, what if? What if? What if I had $1 million? What would I do with $1 million? But with inflation and the way things are skyrocketing, you'd probably be able to go to 7-Eleven and get a hot dog and a Coke with that kind of money. But maybe you sit back and you go, oh, maybe if I had $1 billion, what would I do? Well, Solomon had nothing to worry about as far as money. He had it all. He had it all. But what it does, and his life does, and his writing does for us, because not only did he write Ecclesiastes and most of the Proverbs, and definitely the Song of Solomon, but he also writes some of the Psalms are attributed to him. But what I appreciate about Solomon is the twists and turns that his life has. As you look at the book of Ecclesiastes, you find vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Emptiness. And you go, why? Why does he have so much angst? Why does he have such a vacuous approach to life? And especially if he did it early on in his life, in his writing. Because when you look at Ecclesiastes, you can look at it a couple of different ways. You can look at his dour and sour and morose. Or you can look at it as practicality. An individual who's gone through the optimism of youth has came into the harsh reality of, here's what life is, and I'm going to extract from it what I can, as opposed to cynic that we become later on in life. I don't like to think of myself as a cynic. Every once in a while, I'll get on the curmudgeon side of the equation, and it'll be brought out to me, man, you're getting to be an old dude. No, I just like being curmudgeonly. And look around, and then I go, that's not for me. Can't always be a curmudgeon. And Solomon, in his writings, comes across sometimes a little bit curmudgeonly, but not always. Solomon was an individual who had a rich heritage. His parentage was unparalleled. If you turn back into the book of 1 Kings, in the first chapter, you begin reading there about his parentage. By the time 1 Kings comes around, David is aged. And now we're going to find out that Solomon is a child of his advanced age. But you realize just how fortunate he was. That Solomon had as his father King David. Now, initially, it would appear that Solomon serving in the role of king was not in the plans. But by the time you get down to about verse 10 of 1 Kings 1, you see those plans change. They changed radically. His older brother had gone off the deep end. There was tumult not only in the house, but throughout the nation. And David then made the decision, no. Solomon is going to take over the mantle of the nation. See, David was referred to as a man after God's own heart. But David's life also was replete with twists and turns, and him shooting himself in the foot, as we would say today. He was his own worst enemy at times. And we're going to see that rang true also with Solomon. I want you to notice, you can see it on the overhead. 1 Kings, the second chapter, verses 2 and 3. The following: I'm going the way of all the earth, David says. Be strong, therefore, and show yourself a man. And keep the charge of the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, to keep his statutes, his commandments, his ordinances, and his testimonies, according to what is written in the law of Moses, that you may succeed in all that you do and wherever you turn, so that the Lord may carry out his promise, which he spoke concerning me, saying. And then he goes on talking about the promise. This is what he tells this young man. He's not quite a man yet. But his young son, he said, I want you to have success. In class this morning, we were looking at Joshua, the first chapter, verses 7 and 8. And Joshua was told, don't turn to the right, don't turn to the left. Stay focused, that you'll have success in whatever you do. Well, see, this is the parentage that Solomon had. That David takes Solomon and sets him aside and says, I want you to do this. I don't want you to turn left or right. I want you to stay focused. I want you to have success. That's what I want. I want you to embrace it. I want you to accept it. Now, when you look at the name of Solomon, you find that there's another name that is ascribed to him. You can see it on the back, Jedediah. Beloved of the Lord. Beloved of the Lord. This young man had it all. He was going to be king over arguably one of the most powerful nations on the face of the earth. It was going to be handed right to him. but not without instruction. And that's what's going on here. In the 127th Psalm, you find it's rather interesting because this psalm has been attributed to David, but it has also been attributed to Solomon by various commentators. And the following psalm is seen. Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. Unless the Lord guards the city, the watchman keeps awake in vain. It is vain for you to rise up early, to retire late, to eat the bread of painful labors. For he gives to his beloved, even in his sleep. Behold, children are a gift of the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior, so are the children of one's youth. How blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. They shall not be ashamed when they speak with their enemies in the gate. That is attributed by some commentators to Solomon. It seems consistent with the writings of Solomon. If you look at 1 Kings, the 3rd chapter, verse 9. So give to thy servant an understanding heart, to judge the people, to discern between good and evil. For who is able to judge this great people of thine? That's what Solomon wanted. This is what I asked for. That is a byproduct of his parentage, that he understood where the directive should be. That's great when you have that kind of parentage. I look in the back and see Jacob with Isaiah, and he interacting with Amelia. And I know that they're teaching him. And ultimately, Isaiah is going to follow what he's going to follow, regardless of the parentage that is presented to him. Same thing is true with each and every one of us. I think back to our parentage, to my parents. And I was fortunate in as much as I had 2 mothers. I had 1 father. I had 4 grandfathers. I had 5 grandmothers. I had a lot of people influencing me in my life, all wanting the best for me, but each one coming from a different perspective. David had rich parentage. And David also had something that transcends that. Because if you look closely at the scriptures, you find that Solomon, I said David, I apologize, that Solomon also had as his mentor, Nathan, who served as his teacher. And Nathan was this amazing, intuitive individual who had to go and confront David when he was found in sin. But Solomon had all this going for him. So I want you to take all that and set it over to the side. And keep in mind what David had written in Proverbs. Train up a child in the way he should go, and even when he is old, he will not depart from it. Because that was written by Solomon. Hold that over there with the rich parentage. Now, when Solomon does become king, he is roughly 14 years old. Young, extremely young. But he is going to prove himself rather remarkable. He had a marked style of difference in leadership than did his father. He was very political. David, not so much. But Solomon, absolutely. Absolutely. But that may have been part of his downfall, was the way that he accorded himself as a king. He began to make alliances in spite of what he was taught and what the children of Israel had been taught to do. Back in the book of Deuteronomy in the 7th chapter, verses 1 through 26, God commanded them not to make alliances with foreigners. Unfortunately, David did not take heed to that. But let's stay in 1 Kings for a minute. Go back into 1 Kings, the 3rd chapter. And in the 3rd chapter, look at verses 6 and 7. Thou hast shown great loving kindness to thy servant David, my father, according as he walked before thee in truth and righteousness and uprightness of heart toward thee. And thou hast reserved for him this great loving kindness, that thou hast given him a son to sit on his throne as it is to this day. And now, O Lord my God, thou hast made thy servant king in place of my father David. Yet I am but a little child. I do not know how to go out or to come in. I appreciate Solomon's honesty there. In other words, what he's saying is, I don't know enough to come in out of the rain. That's what he's saying. He's imploring to God, I need help. I long for help. And help he got. But sometimes the help he got was what he didn't need. And it kind of led him down a pathway. When you begin to look at all the political things that he brought to the forefront, the alliance that he made with Egypt had to be one that was startling for the people of Israel, considering what had been said back in Deuteronomy. Had to be. Now, that doesn't make it right because it proved advantageous. Sometimes we do things contrary to God's word, and we think the end justifies the means. It never does. He then began a treaty and a co-working relationship with the city-state Tyre, Tyre. And in merging together with Tyre, it allowed Jerusalem to begin to develop more as a center of commerce and begin to reach out. They became a commercial people. And again, seemingly a good thing. But again, God said, I don't really want you doing these types of things, especially with those that are so estranged from following after my directives. 1 Kings 3 and verse 1. He married a daughter of Pharaoh. Political alliance. Nevertheless, he kind of treated marriage with this cavalier approach. 1 Kings 5, again, talks about that alliance with Tyre and ultimately with Sidon. All of these things he was wise at. Wise in the ways of the world. But was it wise in the sight of God? He was renowned as a politician. The Queen of Sheba heard about him, came up for his advice. And yes, Israel was gaining in notoriety. But again, it doesn't make it right what he was doing. And the people had to be sitting back with one eye kind of raised. Kind of like what we do with politicians today. What in the world do they think they're doing? How come they're doing this? There's a great editorial today talking about the the politicians and the way they just think that they're given carte blanche to do whatever they want to do. And what they would really be better off doing is serving the needs of the people. Fix the potholes. Fix it so the streets don't flood when we have rain. Save the water that's running down over to the ocean so we're not in a perpetual drought. We don't need all this other stuff. I don't want to get up on politics. My blood pressure is being stabilized with medication. But drives you crazy. And if they would only look to the needs of the people. Solomon was a politician. When you read the book of Ecclesiastes, you're going to notice he talks about various things about politicians. He's not always favorable. But then again, remember, he's king. There's nobody to challenge him. But all of this goes into his writing. All of this comes into the realm of who David is. Do you realize that Israel, under his leadership, had control of from Egypt, i.e., from the Nile, all the way to the Euphrates? That's how big Israel was. That's what he controlled, whether it be through what he had, been given by his father, or what he had gained through political alliances. It was monstrative what it was that he was able to do. And it was fulfillment. Absolute fulfillment. But did it make it right? So he's this wise politician. But he was also given a charge by his father. And that is, his father told him that he needed to build the temple. And it would be the pinnacle of his reign. Right now in our country, the politicians are talking about what is going to be President Biden's legacy. The man's been in office a year. They're already talking about legacy. And they're saying that his legacy is going to be, if he can get it passed, this Build Back Better plan, which is going to be, well, again, don't get me off on politics. Stay in the lane, Bruce. Don't go there. Don't go there. But that's going to be his pinnacle. And our politicians seem to want one thing to be paramount of what they did. Well, with Solomon, David really wanted to do it. David wanted to build the temple. God said, no, you're a man of bloodshed. You're not going to do it. But you know what David did? David had, if you look at 1 Chronicles, the 22nd chapter, and you look at verses 14 and 15, you see that David, in anticipation of building the temple, what he had done, he had set money aside for that project. See, when we read the scriptures sometimes, we don't see the big picture. And here's David, who is this king who gained it by might and strength, but he said, in the long run, we need that temple built. So he sets aside money for that purpose. Now, some people today estimate the amount of money that David had set aside. I don't know if I can believe it. They said it would be equivalent today of $3 billion to $5 billion. Whoa, that's a lot of money. But that's what they say that David had set aside. Well, Solomon comes along. And Solomon then begins construction. He takes the money that had been set aside. But he also does something else. And this is typically of a politician. He imposes on the people additional taxes. And he indicates the taxes are going to be used in order to fulfill and complete the building of the temple. The temple is going to be opulent, undoubtedly. Absolutely opulent, beautiful, magnificent in every sense of the word. It will take Solomon about 7 years to complete the construction of the temple. It's a long time. That's a massive process, massive undertaking. But he's going to do it. And no expense is going to be spared. And it will get done. But David had planned for it. David tells him, I want you to do this. Solomon says, I'm willing to do it. And what he does is remarkable. From all accounts of antiquity, of the temple that Solomon makes, it is amazing. The detail, the precision, the beauty. I used the word opulence already. Don't want to be redundant. But all of that is brought into it. And so you stand back and you begin to appreciate all that he did. All that he did. And from a strictly political standpoint, you marvel and you say, whoa, he is an amazing man. And he was. Truly amazing. As a politician, he got a lot done. The building of the temple. The alliances that he made. The fact that there was peace that reigned supreme during his day and time. Even though he went against some of the things that God had indicated for them not to do, he did anyways. But from the most standpoint, people would look at him and they would applaud him. Save it be heavy taxation and, well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's talk about his failures. Because he had them. Go to the 1 Kings, the 12th chapter. And we're going to look at verse 4 beginning. Your father is what we find in verse 4. Your father made our yoke hard. This is Jeroboam going and talking to Rehoboam upon the death of Solomon. And Jeroboam is going as an emissary from the people who are looking to have a little bit of relief from the heavy taxation. Sound familiar? We're talking about raising taxes again. Do you realize how much, and I just want to put it in perspective. Do you realize how much you're paying almost $5 a gallon for gas now? Do you realize how much per gallon you're paying for federal tax, not including state tax? I mean, you stand back and go, whoa. Then you get an additional tax. Then when you die, you get taxed. And on and on and on it goes. You get taxed upon taxed upon taxed. You buy a car, pay tax on it. The company that made the car already paid tax on it before that. Everybody else along the line paid tax on that car. Well, it was the same back in Solomon's time. So here comes Jeroboam. And it's because of this issue, taxation, that causes the split, if you would, of the nation. Watch what happens. Your father made our yoke hard. Therefore, lighten the hard service of your father and his heavy yoke which he put on us, and we will serve you. Lessen the taxation and also the 153,000 laborers that were taken from their home and put in service in order to provide for his projects. When we look next week at the book of Ecclesiastes, we're going to see some of the projects that he had constrained people to perform for him. Now, I'm looking at the life of this man. That's all. None of us are without sin. None. Solomon was an exceptionally gifted individual, but he had his frailties and he had his failings. So when Jeroboam is asking, he said, we want the taxations lessened, and we want these personal projects and other projects stopped. Temple had already been built. There was no more need for that and the craftsmen and all of those things. Notice what Rehoboam says. Depart for 3 days, then return to me. So the people departed. Look at verse 11. 3 days are transpiring, they come back. Here's what Rehoboam says. Where's my father? Loaded you with a heavy yoke. I'll add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions. You ain't seen nothing yet, is what Rehoboam says to people. You thought my father was bad? No. You've seen nothing yet. Now, the sad part about it is that what Solomon did was Solomon had embraced rank hedonism. And that's why I think that the book of Proverbs and the book of Ecclesiastes was written sometime in his middle age, when he was a little bit more pragmatic, before his heart truly turned away from God. Because when you look at the book of Ecclesiastes, what you find is that Solomon talks about the balance in life. And in that balance in life, in Ecclesiastes, he 36 times uses vanity of vanities. 36 times he uses the idea of serving God, a balance. And that's what he's trying to bring out. But he did have his failings. And if you look at 1 Kings, the 11th chapter, verse 1, King Solomon loved many foreign women, along with the daughters of Pharaoh, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonite, and Hittite women, from the nations concerning which the Lord had said to the sons of Israel, you shall not associate with them, neither shall they associate with you, for they will surely turn your heart away after their gods. Solomon held fast to these in love. He had 700 wives, princesses, 300 concubines, and his wives turned his heart away. Continue on reading down through 11. And some people go, well, yeah, Solomon had that many wives and so on, but they really weren't wives like we think of wives. There was a political arrangement. It was for this purpose or that purpose. There was a purpose why he married that woman. My eyes roll back. I don't understand that. And I think the scriptures point this out for us for a reason. That here is this man, this really, really exceptional man. And he had failings like we have. And he writes about it. And he writes beautifully about it. And that we can see that ultimately where his life took him. We can learn from him. Oliver Cromwell, who had his portrait painted one time. And Cromwell was noted as being a common person. But he also had a number of warts and disfigurements. And so the painter who was painting him, he was asking him if he wanted to paint him arms and legs. Cromwell said, no, I don't want extra charge. That's where we get the saying from. It'll cost you an arm and a leg. That's why most paintings are just of the head. cost extra for arms and legs. Cromwell said, no, just paint my face. Okay, then I'm going to paint it without. No. You paint me warts and all. That's what Cromwell said. I like that. We see Solomon warts and all. And I think God gave it to us that way because we can learn from him. We can learn from his failures. And he had a lot. And so when we look at Ecclesiastes in an overview type lesson next week, we're going to see that he lived a full life and we can learn from him. When our sons were growing up, they would ask us questions. And we would tell them straight out, yes, we did that. Yes, this is the way we were. Yes, done that, been there. Do not want it for you, ever. And we did everything in our power to keep them from going down that same road. Everything. David did the same thing for Solomon. You realize that? I don't want you going down the same road, but ultimately it's going to be your decision. In the 16th chapter of the book of Ezekiel, God said the same thing to Israel. I took you, I clothed you, I did this for you, I did that for you. But ultimately what you're going to choose is going to be yours. And they turn their back on God. So when we look at Ecclesiastes, I look at it from the standpoint of here is a man who at that stage in his life really wants to share with his children what he's discovered. Same way with Proverbs. Same way with the book Song of Solomon. And then we see him later on in life, that his choices took him far away from God. His heart was turned away from God. He allowed himself to be led astray. The strength that he once had, that he once held on to, was no longer his. And if you continue on reading in those verses where we were just reading a little while ago, you say he made ashrams for the various women and wives. Detestable things. And he did all of this. Hedonism. Hedonism. If you look at verse 40 of 1 Kings 11, you find that he also sought to kill Jeroboam in order to prevent God's punishment for his sins, Solomon's sins. I'll go ahead and kill Jeroboam. How sad and pathetic. On the overhead, you can see this quote from the 11th chapter. Now the Lord was angry with Solomon because his heart was turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice, commanded him concerning this very thing. God warned him. God warned him. And yet Solomon went down this pathway. So now, we have a little bit of the backstory of the author. We're going to finish this up this afternoon, come back and look at a few more things. But I like looking at the backstory. I like seeing what the author, what he went through, what he was dealing with, and what he's telling me not to do. Because he's been there, done that. And sad to say that he serves as an example, and not always a positive one. There's positives to his life, yes, but there's also negatives. We don't want our life to turn into a negative. We want our life to always be that stellar example. And we look at the parentage of Solomon. And then we stand back and look at our spiritual parentage. Those of us that have put on Christ in the waters of baptism, we are children of God. And how fortunate, how blessed we are. Children of God. We need to reflect that parentage in all that we do and all that we're about. Well, the lesson is yours this morning. And I hope that it'll help us with a better understanding when we open up Ecclesiastes and look at it again in an overview form Lord willing, next Sunday morning, that we can see it, appreciate it, and just realize that God has thankfully made us free moral agents, that we don't have to continue on the way that we are or were, that we can change, and that as long as there is life, there is hope. But if there's any here that might be subject to the invitation in any way, we'd be more than happy to assist you with your spiritual walk, whether it be in regards to putting on Christ in the waters of baptism for the remission of your sins, or prayers on your behalf for spiritual strength, whatever we can do to help.